Okay, in this final video we return and go through a globalization phase. There's the globalization phase track here that helps us to remember what the steps are. So we first start with resources, simply awarding the site's resources as indicated by the following. So resources you earn as indicated on the player mats. Let me zoom in. And in particular the free slots here from the economic influence track. So the US has all 6 pieces, earning them 8 resources. They would also earn more resources if they had any of the alignment markers on the map, which is however not the case. So it is 8 resources that takes them up to 15, which is maximum indeed. Another thing we would add to this, if the resource track had any capacity more, is the so-called NATO bonus, which is indicated here on the NATO track, the +2 there, but that is not relevant at this moment. And so what about the EU? The EU has 4 resources indicated on the economic track there, and so they jump from 2 they jump from 2 to 6 resources like this. They don't have the alignments on map, and they don't get the NATO bonus, so that's that. China, only just 2 resources, so we jump to 6. And the same for the Russians. They go from -3 to -1. That is not very good, but so it is. And another thing we remember to add in terms of resources is, and going back to the EU, so for each economic influence piece that they have in the home space of another player, they get a resource. So this would be the case here in Americas, in the United States, that is. So the EU will collect 1 more resource. The US we may know since they're already at 15. China has 1 economic influence in the European Union and another in the United States, so we will gain 2 additional resources, going from 6 to 8. And the Russians have 1 in China, and that's it. So they go from -1 to 0. Okay, and so that's the resources step. We go to military spending. Military spending always equals the number of military influence pieces on the map for each power. So for the US that would be 3. For the US and EU, you always have to have a look what's the military spending of the power itself and the and NATO on the other hand. So it's 3 both. So the US pays the higher of those. Well, it's 3 anyway, so they pay 1, 2, 3. The EU always pays the NATO 1, so goes down 1, 2, 3. China has got 1 military influence in Asia Pacific, so we pay 1. Russia also has got 1 military influence over in Eastern Europe, paying also 1 resource. Going into the NATO step, so this is basically where we either improve or decrease or decline the level of the NATO, or the status of the NATO alliance. The rule is US and the EU must collectively pay 2 resources, and so this is in a all human player game, sometimes a negotiation point. The non-players will simply agree to pay 1 resource each, and so that's that. NATO doesn't apply to the Chinese and the Russians, obviously. Now we come to the military might step, and what happens in this step is we look at spaces where the authoritarians are contesting democratic military influence. And we've got 2 spaces, so I paid close attention to engage into these contests. So let me just zoom in and we have a look at, for instance, Asia Pacific. We've got one level of US military influence versus Chinese military influence there. The contest here is not deterministic. It is resolved in part by spending resources for a die roll modifier and then rolling dice. With the US, the math is so they get to roll a 1d6 and you add the military influence level, the higher of the military influence level or the military spending to their die roll. So, and we remember the US military spending is 3. And the non-players also get to spend resources. They will spend, if they can, a die roll worth of resources, which the US probably will do since they are at 11. But I, as the contesting power, and more importantly as the human player, have to first decide my spending. So my math in this contest will be, I get to roll a die as well. I will add also the higher of my military spending or the level of military influence in the space, which is 2 to my die roll. So I will add 2 and I get to spend resources, how many I like, to boost my contest. And now the question is, of course, 7 resources, how many do I want to spend? So let me spend 6. I fall from 7 to 1. So we're investing quite heavily in this operation here. And then we see, so at this moment, just to be clear, the Chinese math is we've got 2 levels of military influence plus 6 resources spent, so 8. Let me just type it down there so I remember. And the US has got 3 levels of military spending plus the resources they spend, and for the non-players you simply roll a die and spend that many resources. So let's see, 6. Okay, so they will spend 6 resources, going from 11 down to 5. And so you might wonder what is at stake here. Well, at stake is the US losing a victory point if they lose this die roll battle here. So this is quite interesting. So at this moment the US has got +9, we've got +7, +8. So US essentially has got +1 advantage in the die rolls. And so we roll, let's roll white for the US, a 1, okay. And for the Chinese we roll the black one and it's a 6. So even with the +1 added to the US die roll, we win. So we will do the following. We will remove the US military influence in the space. We will place 1 tension marker in the space. And as I mentioned, the democratic power that loses a military contest will lose 1 VP. So they will go down from 6 to 5 victory points. All right, that was pretty successful from the Chinese point of view. And so we move to the second space that is being contested by the same mechanic as before. Here the situation is NATO is being contested by Russians, and NATO military spending is 3, which is more than the 2 levels of military influence. So NATO has got a strength of 3 plus whatever they will roll and choose to spend. And the Russians have to think about their spending. So the Russians have 2 levels of military influence, which is 1 more than the level of military spending. So Russians will get a 2 plus, well, we already at -1 resource, so I don't think I'm going to be spending anything there. So we will simply now determine the NATO military spending, and that would be a die roll 5. So, and for the non-players, that means they will split it equally. So let's say we take 2 from the EU and then 1, 2, 3 from the US. So US is going with quite a lot of advantage. NATO is going with quite a lot of advantage into this die roll. I'm not even sure if we can win this, but let's just roll it. So NATO rolls the white die, and it's a 6. So, and then we roll our die, the black one, which is also a 6. So we get 6, 7, 8 versus, well, 14. So yeah, no chance there for the Russians. They lose 1 level of military influence, gain 1 tension there, which works in our favor because it shifts bases towards authoritarianism. NATO stays where it is, and no victory point losses there. So that would be the military might step. Then we would proceed to adjusting the order of play according to the resource levels. This doesn't apply in games with non-players, but basically we would adjust. Well, actually, we would keep the order of play as it is, because it goes the player with most resources would go first, and that's the US, and the second would be the player with second largest amount, which would be a tie between the EU and the Chinese, which would resolve in favor of the existing order of play, shown by the way here on the order of play track. And so the Chinese would actually keep their position, but this is a non-player situation, so we will simply leave that as it is. And then we go into the world events step. So let me since this video is getting a little bit longer than anticipated, so I will after all do this in 2 parts. I will stop here and continue in a second video, so see you very soon.